and they would roll that wafer around there while it was still warm and pliable, and then they would pull that off, and they would have oplatky that looked like this. Now, to take it a step further, as people begin to gild the lily, they put powdered sugar on it sometimes, sometimes granulated sugar. A lot of times they used what they had. They couldn't go down to the Giant Eagle and get it, so they used what they had. And then they began to take them now, and they began to put creams in them, jellies in them, so they were filled. Just like those Italian cookies you can get at the supermarket or the dollar store. But again, they began to or they would take these as they came out, the sweet version, and they would begin to take them and they would stack them one on top of the other. But as they stacked them, they would put a filling between there, maybe some raspberry. It looks just like a Kit Kat that we have in the store here. But layers of that, and then once all those layers held together, you put something to weight them. My mother always had a favorite brick that we had to go get from the yard to put on her dill pickles when she made them, to hold them down. Or when she made her stuffed cabbage on top of the stove with a plate inverted, and it would be rather than in the oven. But that's the two ways that they would make them, with all the sweetness to them, and add different flavorings. And again, as people had different things that they had to use, they would make that part of what they were doing. Again, now in the Eastern Church, the Byzantines, we may have some Byzantines here. There are some Byzantine Slovaks. They also would have a wafer. Not a wafer, but they would also have bread. Their bread looked more like a biscuit. And everything I'm talking about, you get a copy of everything, including recipes. But it looked more like a biscuit. And they would take that and they would have their consecration using those same English words, but in Slavonic, or in English now, to bless the body. And they would take it and break it and give it to everybody along with wine for Holy Communion. Whatever was left, they would put into the tabernacle. As the priest was telling me last night, we talked about a couple hours about this. He goes, Larry, they put it into like a little sarcophagus. I said, but that's a coffin. He goes, yeah, it's like a little sarcophagus. He was very proud of that. But they would take and put it in there. But they also had a way of sharing bread outside of their liturgy, their divine liturgy. And what they would do is, all that bread that they baked, that they didn't eat, they would put it on the side. And if it was a special holy day, they would take these, what looked like biscuits to me, and crack them up in little pieces, about an inch by inch. And they would give them to people. They would come prepared with hankies or napkins or, I think, Ziploc bags. And they would take these home for those who were older and sick and couldn't make it to church. So they would not have the sacrament of Holy Communion, but they would have the blessings of that communion, of that wafer, of that bread, at home on holy days. It was called mirovanie, and they would share that with everybody. Again, we have the host. We have the phosphora, which is what they call their communion. And of course, then we have the waffle iron. And then we have the waffles. Now, most of you people usually get the oplatky from like a Polish church or a religious store in the mail. And they're square. And that's like sort of lame. Because they're not really square in nature. They're round. While I'm going to continue to talk a little bit, I'm going to ask someone who'd like to be my helper. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to take a cup of water. Everybody said, what's that recipe for oplatky? It's very easy. A cup of water to a cup of flour, pure white flour. Here's the flour. Here's a spoon. Here's a measure. And what you want to do is when you make it, put a half a cup of flour and a half a cup of water together in there. And you mix that together to get the lumps out. And then what you're going to do is mix that second water and that second flour. It'll be better. And there's your mixing bowl. There's your whips and everything else.
Audience participation.
But, of
Don't
course.
wear black.
Yeah.
That's as bad as we had a big dinner at the church, and we're sitting there, and the priest is eating these, what we call kruszczyki, but you call them štedry. And he was eating, he's bald, of course. He's eating away at his kruszczyki, and he had that powder all over his priest. I said, Father, what is that? I said, he said, it can't be dandruff, you're bald, but you don't eat these when you have black on. But we're going to end up with a total cup of water and a total cup of the flour.
Okay.
What's interesting in Slovakia on St. Lucy's Day, which is when the days begin to change, December 13th, that's when they would go around and collect up all the wheat, the flour from all the different people to make the opłatek that they would have for the whole village. Again, St. Lucy was very special. It was thought on St. Lucy's Day, speaking of flour, is that they would dress themselves in white sheets, is all I can say. And they would cover their faces in flour, so they wouldn't be known. And they would have a wing of goose. And they would come through the house in a very, very, very sort of a special kind of blessing through the house. And they would brush all over to get all the evil out of the house, out to the door. And then they would have a cross to kiss, so everybody in there, in that home, would kiss the cross and ask for Jesus' protection, and they went on to the next house. But they were very mysterious. They were very mysterious because they didn't want anybody to know who they were, even the evil spirits that might know who they are. They didn't want that to happen, so they were all covered in sometimes a nice like lace, but a lot of times just with flour, and that would cover their faces. But they collected all that wheat up, and they would take it, and they would grind it up, where they had the grinder for the whole, the mill for the whole town, and then they began to make their opłatek from that. Again, Slovaks use it, and they call it Oplatky or Oplatky, spelled with a Y, not an I. We have an I, Oplatky. Again, and Lithuanians also do it, and that's interesting because they're way up there by the Baltic. Now, they're not even Slavic people. They just were thrown in there. Their language is based on Sanskrit. That's when you hear Lithuanian, it has no sense to it at all. But they have something, and guess what they call? And again, they always put those ouses on everything. Everything is an ouse at the end of their language. So they have opłatki, which goes back to that root, and they call it opłatkalis. I did some stuff for Lithuanians one time, and they kept saying what my name was, and I said, "Oh, my name is Kozlowski," because all the different endings make a different nationality. But they also do that, and again, their language is completely different. We have something in similar, with our language, even into the Czech language, up into the Lusatian language or the Sorbian language. It's in Germany. They have a very good connection to our languages, which are, for the most part, pretty much similar. Some little differences come over from the Ukraine, some little differences come over from the Carpatho-Rusins. But again, we share many, many things together. And again, it gets back to that whole oblatum thing, that sharing of the wafer. Some of this before Christianity came along, before it became Christian. And unfortunately or unfortunately, Slovakia fell in the same boat with Poland. It was the Russian monks that Christianized them. Stop there, the line is like right there. Except when you go to Eastern Slovakia, that's where you have the Orthodox that came up from down below, from Greece into Bulgaria, into parts of Yugoslavia, up into the Ukraine, to the Carpatho-Rusins, and over into the Russians. So you had you almost split it right down there. But again, their faith that they then would then follow would be that of Orthodoxy or Eastern, we don't want to say Orthodoxy, but Eastern churches. If you've heard that term, Grecka Katolicka, Greek Catholic. There are many, many, many Slovaks down in Uniontown. There's that border. It's always saying, well, where do those Russians go? They say, well, those are people with no country, Because they can go, but you have a lot of mixing. When you heard that term, I went over to do some research in churches. Do we get a full cup in here?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes, a cup of each.
See, how is it looking?
There's not a lump.
Good. Not a lump. I'm going to bring you home with me.
Don't look too carefully.
There's a church in Duquesne. Its name on the cornerstone, although it was now I think they tore it down not too long ago. They said they were Slavish. People call them Slavish. So they began to have all different ways to call themselves. But the one thing that they call themselves is they call themselves together. It's those lodges, it's those churches, it's all those mom and pop stores that they kept together. Just like now, and we're sort of losing all that now. But if you're Hispanic, or you're Indian, or your Lebanese. Those are the new immigrants coming over now. And they're back where we were, where we had down in Woods Run our little polka club that we went to. Or we always went to whatever. Or those lodges that had all those insurance policies. And the first thing you did when you were a little kid, you were born, grandmother got you here's your paid up policy. It's good until you're 21. At 21 you get a couple thousand, and that goes on until you die. They could do that in little increments of money because they had that money. But that brought them together. Not only was it the insurance, but they had dances. They had Christmas parties. They had Easter parties. Oftentimes at some of those Slovak lodges, they would bring their baskets to be blessed, and the priest would come to the, you remember that? Come to your lodge, and everything would be out on the tables. It wasn't in church, it was in your lodge. Just like it is in the villages. It wasn't in church, it was outside in front of the church. Because you didn't want to go in and see all that beauty that was waiting inside there when they opened those doors at the sunrise service to say, Christ is risen. So there's all sort of different things. And everything I tell you, someone else will say, we do it different. Now I can say this about my own people. When you put two Polacks in a room, they have three opinions. Okay? But everyone has something a little different. It depends where they came from. And when they came here, sometimes they ended up in Chicago or up in New York, and then they ended up in Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh has, I think, the largest number of Slovaks were in Pittsburgh. It was those people who came together. It was that accord that was signed here. With you have a lot of very famous things that happened, with being Slovak and being also now Slovak American.
We have more Slovaks in Allegheny County than you have in Bratislava.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's something that you need to be proud of. And I hope that in some way, and it's difficult to instill it in your children so that they also can be proud of who they are. Because as we come into this crazy world, and every day you turn on the news and who's getting killed where, we came from a very poor time, but a very good time. You had nothing, but you made it all happen somehow. Absolutely.
Larry, can I ask a question
Sure.
before I forget it, since you brought it up on St. Lucie and different traditions? My grandmother used to put honey on the doorknobs on the feast of St. Lucie. Do you have any idea?
Honey is believed to be a magical kind of thing. It's something that not everybody had. They couldn't go and get Domino sugar at the store. They would sweeten things with honey, which they had to go out in the forest and find. And came from that honey came the beeswax that they used for candles and other things. But they would cultivate those beehives because they would give them the sweetener, which was thought to be a gift from the gods. The other type of sweetener that came later on was sugar beets. Sugar beets, which we use for soups. But they would take these big, huge ones. They look like big yams or sweet potatoes. And they take them, they chop them up, boil them down, and then they get the dextrose, the sugar that's natural sugar in that beet, until Poland and Slovakia, under the communist regime, began to trade with Cuba. That's when we got sugar from the sugar cane. That's how that came in. But I would believe that was, and again, there's a bunch of different things that happen with not just holy water, but there's a feast, there's a thing of salt in the back, I don't remember what day it is. But they take that salt and they bless it in church, and then they sprinkle it over the doorways, like crosses where the thresholds are, to keep out evil. But also honey was another way of anointing it. Do you remember on Candlemas Day when they would bless the candles? And they would take that and light that every time. I can remember when I was a little kid, my mother had a blessed candle from church on February 2nd when you went and got them. And then she always had blessed palms, of course. And it would start to rain and thunder and lightning. And I said, Mom, what's going on? I was a little kid. She goes, don't worry about it, Larry, it's nothing. She said, go over and get Daddy's ashtray. Bring me some of those palms over here. Bring me that candle over here. And she would light that candle and say a prayer. And she would burn some of those palms that were blessed in that ashtray. And she believed, again, that would be enough to protect her with her prayers. I said, but what's going on? She goes, don't worry about it. She goes, all that is, when you hear thunder and lightning, what did your mother tell you?
Angels are bowling.
Angels are bowling up in heaven. Don't worry about it. It'll be over.
Did that all the time.
But they did all these things to live. If they didn't do them, it's like the Christmas Eve table to have so many different types of foods, or so many people, or the first person that comes in on Christmas Day should be a dark-haired man. There's all these things, and they lived by them. Now, were they superstitious? Maybe a little bit. But you know what? They knew how to live. I was talking to Sue Andrejko, and we were talking, I'd like to put a book together about folk medicine. My mother cut her hand, she was whittling away, doing something, and you know how you just have deja vu, she went right into her hand. She goes, here, take this piece of rye bread, go down in the basement, put a couple spider webs on it, bring it up, put it on her hand, fine the next day. Sue was doing the same thing. Her new baby, her new grandbaby, had some problems, and her stomach, and this and that and the other thing, and the doctor said this, and the doctor said that, and the doctor said that. So what she did, is she went to her, no, you get some of these caraway seeds, and you put it in some water, and you cook it, and you give them that, and their stomach will be fine, and it was fine the next day. So there's lots of wisdom to some of these things we say. These people